Let's walk together. Let's live together. Let's walk together, hand in hand.
Friends, we have begun our synodal journey at the diocesan level. In the past Sundays, we've had very beautiful readings of Jesus journeying towards Jerusalem and encountering many people. 10th of October, we had Jesus meeting the rich young man, and the man could not follow Jesus because he was burdened by his wealth. The next Sunday, we had James and John who were asking for seats at his right and at his left, seats of power and authority, and Jesus speaks to them about being servants. Last Sunday, we had blind Bartimaeus, who is cured and becomes a follower of Jesus. And today we have a scribe coming up to ask Jesus a very important question. Today's gospel passage is from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 12, verses 28 to 34. But already in chapter 11, we have Jesus arriving in Jerusalem, and he's gone into the temple and thrown out the money changers and all people who are making profit on the temple. So he has got a lot of enemies, people who are waiting to kill him, the scribes, the Pharisees, and other people who have power and influence in Jerusalem. Now, in this chapter 12, Jesus is asked many questions by the Pharisees, the Herodians about paying taxes, should they pay taxes or not, and questions also by the Sadducees about resurrection. Now, in all these questions, they're trying to sum up who Jesus is, and they're trying to trap him. And this passage today begins with a scribe coming up to ask Jesus this question, which is the greatest of all commandments. Now, who is a scribe? A scribe is what today you might call a theologian or a canon lawyer, who's well versed in scripture and in the laws and the traditions of his people. So this man comes up to Jesus to ask this question, and Jesus is open to encountering him. He does not judge him, but listens to what he is asking him. And the question is extremely simple, which is the greatest commandment of all? And Jesus responds to him saying, the greatest commandment is something which the Jews would pray for every day, what is called the Shema Israel, from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and you must love God with your whole heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And then Jesus juxtaposes, puts together another commandment from Leviticus 19, verse 18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now this scribe seems to be open to what Jesus is saying, and he responds positively saying, yes, Lord, what you say is right, that we must love God, who is one, and we must love our neighbor. And then he says a sentence which is very striking. He said, all this is more important than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. I think it is significant that this person is saying that the love of God and love of neighbor are more important than burnt offerings and sacrifices. Because the whole temple structure was built upon sacrifices and offerings and a lot of rites and rituals, do's and don'ts. But religion can never be limited to rites and rituals and this legalistic aspect. And then Jesus sees that he is answered correctly and says, you are not far from the kingdom. And the questioning ends over there. So there is this beautiful encounter where Jesus listens very carefully to the scribe, answers his questions, and the scribe seems to come to a deeper understanding of the love of God and the love of neighbor, which are both extremely important. So the question is this, addressed to you and to me, the great commandment of love. Jesus says that love of God is important because obviously God is love and God is the source of all our loving. But only if we were to love God and not love our sisters and brothers, there would be something wrong. There would be no fruits really for that great root of God's love. Or the other way around, if we loved people around us, the neighbors, and did not love God, that too would be incomplete. So when we look at this commandment of love of God and love of neighbor, Jesus really puts us a question about who really is our neighbor. For the pious Jew, The neighbor was a fellow Jew, somebody who belonged to the community. But when Jesus is referring to neighbor, he means everybody who responds to people in need. We have a very good example in Luke chapter 10 when Jesus speaks of the Good Samaritan. And that is something that Pope Francis has stressed upon, Fratelli Tutti, saying that all of us are supposed to be neighbor to the person who is in need. And today there are many people who have been victimized and who are at the margins, at the periphery of society, crying out for help, crying out for response. How do we reflect upon this passage? The focus is certainly love. And the preparatory document of the Synod speaks about reflecting on all these questions at two levels. The level of the church and the level of society at large. So I think you and I can ask ourselves, how do I love? We can speak of the vertical level, so to say, of our love for God, manifest through our prayer, through attending maybe the Eucharist, novenas, and religious activities in general. That could be the first level. At the second level, we can ask ourselves about people in the church. How do we journey together as a church? All of us baptized. What are our activities? How do we participate in church life? But more importantly is to ask ourselves, who is my neighbor outside this close circle of the church? That is people outside. The poor, the sick, the suffering, and ultimately also nature, Mother Nature. But let us be concrete. It's very easy to say, I love all people. But when it comes to names and faces, that is where the true test is. So today, let me ask myself and let us ask ourselves about the quality of our love. Whether this love is a love which reaches out to others. Because Jesus has said, love one another as I have loved you. John chapter 15, verse 12. And St. John again in his letter, the first letter of St. John, chapter 4, verse 20 says, how can you love God who is invisible when you hate your brother or sister who is visible? So today we'll spend some time reflecting on our love and we'll see how we love God and how this overflows into love of people in our own community, since charity begins at home but doesn't end there, and how concretely we love people who are in need. The poor, the sick, the suffering, people who are depressed, people who have lost their jobs. And each of these are sisters and brothers of Jesus. And each of these is my brother, my sister, my friend. So like Jesus, let us listen to people and respond to them. And let us love as Jesus has loved us to the very end, unconditionally, joyfully, and generously.